Album number 4, Neil Young After the Gold Rush. This comes out in 1970. Um, why does this album mean so much to you? Neil Young is another artist where you could pick, I don't know, 6 of his albums and they're all, they're all-time greats.
Yeah. This one kind of, yeah, I got exposed to it at just a really cool time in my life. It was the first time I had ever done a cross Canada tour with the old band I played in, White Cowbell, Oklahoma. And we were doing a drive. Like we were hitting all the things. First stop was Lethbridge, Alberta. And I remember this was my first time going out there. It would have been late fall. And I remember I had my little iPod and I had this album, Neil Young After the Gold Rush. I had it on there. I think I got it from my brother or something. Had it on there, and we were just driving, I remember, through the mountains, and I just put it on, and it starts dum, 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 sailing on. And I was like, oh, this is like perfect for like the scenery I'm going through now. And then the next song came on, Old Lonesome Me, I believe. And then I was just like, oh, this is great. And then the next song, and it just kept going and going. And it had this like, even though it was recorded in the States, it had this feeling of like Canadiana. I like really love the Canadian kind of thing in music. And even though Neil Young got out, it's like Canada's all over all of his works. But there's there's a realness to this album. I think there's a common theme in all these things. But there's like a realness to the band that he's playing with, to the way he sings. It encapsulates just this vision of, I don't know, Canada and driving out west with the band on my first tour. It was right after Joel, we went to school together. It was right after Metalworks. Didn't know if I want to get into the music biz. And then I joined up with this band and they're like, hey, we're doing this month-long tour. And I'm like, I'm in. So it kind of came to me. This album came at a very pivotal point in my music career when I was hitting the road for the first time. And I put this thing on and I'm transported into this like GM Safari van, just driving through. It was cold, but it was cool. Everything was new. It was exciting. You don't know what kind of town you're rolling into, and just stopping at these little places and, going for a little bathroom break in the middle of like the mountains. It takes me to that whole era. And I think all the songs are amazing on the album. And once again, it's a no skip album for me. Every single song, even ending with Cripple Creek Ferry at the end, it's almost like a half song. You know what I mean? It's just love it.
So there's 2 singles, Only Love Can Break Your Heart and When You Dance, I Can Really Love. And nice. There's at least 3 other really well-known songs on there. So tell me why After the Gold Rush and Southern Man are like quintessential Neil Young songs, even though they're not considered singles. So I believe there's only like 10 songs on the album. So right away, there's 5 songs that are like, songs that the world knows. The album goes on to sell over 2 million copies in the US alone. And what's cool is, so why is it called After the Gold Rush? So Neil Young was handed a script for a movie called After the Gold Rush that was supposed to be made. And he, based on the script, he reached out and said, I'd like to make the music for the movie. And he started making it, and the movie just never got made. So he has this album After the Gold Rush that is essentially the soundtrack, or started as the soundtrack to a movie. Yeah. And 2 songs were written specifically for the movie. So After the Gold Rush and Cripple Creek Ferry actually has to do with what the content would have been in the movie. When you're asking like, what's Cripple Creek Ferry? It's like, it was a part of this movie.
Love that song. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Another song I like on that one is Castles Burning. That's like a big one of mine. It's in like a weird guitar tuning. I remember trying to learn it. It has this, I can't describe it. I just like listening to that album. I just picture like misty, like kind of mountains. And it's just an album that really paints some kind of emotional like picture to me is great, because albums are also like just straight up time machines. You know what I mean? Like when you get into an album at a certain period in your life, and then you kind of back off from it from a bit, as soon as you turn it on, you're like transported to those exact moments again. It's like the closest thing you can kind of get. And I just have that on like overload with this album. It's that's cool. I didn't know that though about the script. It makes sense.
Yeah. So in this series, so in my 5 favorite album series, I've had to listen to about 50 albums so far. And this is the first time where I listen to my music on Spotify. I mean, you can listen on Spotify or Apple or wherever. This is the first time where I couldn't listen to the album on Spotify because of the Neil Young boycott. So Joe Rogan, biggest podcaster in the world, signs $100 million deal with Spotify. And during the pandemic, he got in a lot of trouble for what was considered misinformation. So people thought he was saying things that weren't accurate about vaccines and about the pandemic, and that it was perhaps causing harm. And later on, looking back, it shows that what he was saying was true. It was just going against conventional wisdom. But anyways, a lot of musicians, starting with Neil Young, boycotted Spotify and removed all their music. So I couldn't listen to this album on Spotify. It is available in its entirety on YouTube. So that's how I consumed it. But I'm bringing up that point because I want to ask you guys, is there any musician in human history that has stood up for what he believes in and stuck to his guns as much as Neil Young? I mean, this guy is known for speaking his truth.
I like to think Lennon, maybe.
That's a good point. Okay, there's a few, but Neil Young would definitely be one of them. Yeah.
Neil Young, yeah. I mean, like it sucks, but it really sucks that he's not on Spotify, because I want to listen to his music and I'm like, I can't listen to it in the car. Just straight up, I want to look for stuff. Even on YouTube, sometimes you get it pitched in a different thing, and I'm just like, what does he want me to do? Like buy the CD right now? Like no one even has CD players in cars, and it sucks because I can't listen to Neil Young when I want to, and I like listening.
He definitely doesn't like the YouTube commercials whenever I run it through my phone. Mine.
Yeah.
What's funny is there's still actually a handful of Neil Young songs on Spotify.
Yeah,
only because his song was on the Eat Pray. He had a few songs on the Eat Pray Love soundtrack. So the soundtrack is up, and he doesn't have the power to remove it because it's from the label that has the soundtrack. So you can still hear Heart of Gold and a couple other songs. So there's like a few Neil Young songs there, but all the ones he could remove, he definitely removed.
I wish he would get back on it though. It just sucks because I genuinely am a big Neil Young fan, and I just can't listen to his music. I don't know where. Like I said, YouTube, it's like hit or miss with the songs, and I want to just be able to listen to an album in its entirety. So Neil, I remember trying to read his book. It was hard to get through his book though. He had what was it?
I read that book.
I don't know. I found it tough to get through, to be honest. I love Neil, but it was like one chapter was like a paragraph, and he's just like, my trains are like this. And I'm like, okay, I can't get into the trains. I want to know about the life, you know? But to your point, Neil Young does what Neil Young wants to do. And Joel, correct me, and maybe you're going to bring this up, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you did have a Neil Young encounter.
I did. So one year I was working at the Junos. I don't know if this is the story you're talking about, but I've only met him once. So hopefully this is a story. So I was working the Junos, and my job was to bring the celebrities as they arrived at the venue, bring them to the backstage area, and then bring them to the stage when they're going on. And at one point, I'm just walking, and I guess I'm distracted. So I'm walking into the room here, but I'm looking this way, and I turn into the room, and there's just Neil Young. There's nobody else. There's Neil Young and I. And I turned into him, so I didn't get a moment to like collect myself. I was like thrusted into the universe of Neil Young, and I turn and he's just there. And it's probably the only time I've been starstruck. And I think it's because one, it's Neil Young, so there's a human being, but there's like this whole history of music like in that person, you know. So it's like you're looking at this living, breathing embodiment of the history of music, and you know, he's so iconic that it's hard to see him as a physical person. You know, it's like, oh, he's real. Like he's not just this icon or this myth or something. And also that I turned into him, so I had no like heads up that this was going to happen. So that's my random Neil Young story.
That's amazing. The reason I remember that is because I think you asked me if I wanted to help out on that, and I had a show that night. And then later I remember hearing you're like, I saw Neil Young. I'm like, what?
I made a grave mistake not going.
Yeah. Should have ditched, cancel on that gig. But that's amazing. Yeah, Neil. I talk about this a lot, but it's like when people are asking us why we, come down to California and stuff. And it's like Canada had a great folk scene. It still does. But, Neil Young, Gordon Lightfoot, I always use those two as like the guys. They're from the same kind of scene. They were part of the Yorkville like thing. But Neil Young got out of Canada, went to the States. Gordon Lightfoot stayed in Canada. Now down here, people know who Gordon Lightfoot is, but they know him for the crash of the Edmund Fitzgerald and maybe Sundown. I don't know what his.
Read My Mind or whatever.
You could read my mind. Oh yeah, but that got remixed too. So he has a few hits, but like Neil Young came down here, has just so many hits, and I feel like that might be a bit of an example of if Gordon Lightfoot was down here, he could have had a bit of a big thing. I guess I'm making a bad point. It sounds like I'm not saying good things about the Canadian music industry. I don't mean it in that sense. I'm just saying when you're down in the States, you're so close to so many major markets and so many people, different radio stations, that you can just get amplified and get in front of so many more people down here, and Canada does a great job. I love the whole Canadian content. Like I said, I'm a big Canadiana guy. I know Chris is a big Blue Rodeo guy, so we love that stuff, but I always find it interesting that Gordon Lightfoot and Neil Young, cut from the same cloth, but one came to the States and really became this rock legend of legends, and then Gordon Lightfoot, Canadian national hero, but kind of outside of Canada, I was like, oh, yeah, Gordon Lightfoot, you know what I mean? So it's just, I find that fascinating with
a lot of times Canadian artists do have to go to the US and break through before Canada embraces them, that, oh, they're big, actually they're our own, and suddenly Canada starts playing. So you hear that story a lot. When I was looking into this album, man, there's 80 artists that cover songs off of this album, and I guess two of the most prominent ones, Nora, two ends of the spectrum. You have Nora Jones and you have Radiohead that both cover Tell Me Why, which is just to show that a song at its core, if you strip it to just acoustic guitar and vocal, it's a great song. And then you could, as Nora Jones, you could spiff it up on the piano in a jazzy manner, and then Radiohead, you could do whatever Radiohead does to a song. So it's kind of cool. The album, Rolling Stone has it on its list of 500 greatest albums of all time. So it has it number 322. And I know there's lots of Neil Young albums on there, but this one definitely shows up. I always heard about the lore behind the song Southern Man. Have you heard stories about Southern Man?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, if you know stuff and you want to share, you can go ahead. And
well, all I know is that Sweet Home Alabama was the response to Southern Man, because Southern Man is Neil Young talking about, I guess, all the things he saw in the South and how backwards it was, and Southern Man, you better, all this stuff. And then Leonard Skinner came out
with Sweet Home Alabama,
and I heard Young sing about it. It's
so you have two of the most iconic songs that are in reference to each other. So I thought that was cool. And so with Neil Young, it was Southern Man, and it also his song Alabama. So those two together were bashing the South. So it was the two of them combined. And Lynyrd Skynyrd, over the years, Neil Young and Lynyrd Skynyrd, they actually, they're friends, and they love each other's music, and they'll, just to show that they're good, it's Neil Young will wear a shirt that has to do with Lynyrd Skynyrd and vice versa. So even though they seem like two protest songs against each other, it was just what inspired these amazing songs, and they're all good.
And people are just standing up for Lynyrd Skynyrd is just well, the South isn't all that bad, and this is where we grew up, and they were just kind of stating their case a little bit. But that was cool. Neil Young's always great on the protest stuff too. I mean, 4 Dead in Ohio. That was about the shootings there. And he always kind of touches on really cool topics, and just has great grooves and songwriting behind it. That's what's so cool about it, about Neil Young.
When I first moved to Mississauga, I went and saw Neil Young with Crazy Horse in Hamilton. So I went with Alex Andronacki, which is
that's awesome,
pretty cool. So I think we were on the floor for Neil Young with Crazy Horse, and it was a grunge show. He's considered the godfather of grunge because he has distortion in some really old songs, so they call him the godfather of grunge. And it was I was seeing Nirvana. It was a grungy show when he has Crazy Horse with them.